Right now, war in the Baltic Sea. The ships have already set sail. Putin has gone all in. A terrifying decision has been made. America has made the first move in the nuclear game. The US has deployed nuclear aircraft. The bombs are already in Britain. Meanwhile, the front is boiling. Pokrovsk is on fire. The FU has done the incredible. This is a real victory. The Russians did not expect this. Putin is furious. The Kremlin is in hysteria. The Caucasus is slipping out of control. Baku is preparing revenge for the downed plane. This blow has shaken Russia. The Russian Federation is losing allies. What did Aliyev say, and why is there panic in the Kremlin? The people are no longer silent. And right now in Istanbul, Erdoğan and Trump are destroying the Russians and Putin. There is a real catastrophe in the Russian Federation. The AFU knocked out key military targets. Hell and the missile default in Russia. The great power is almost out of ballistic missiles. The Kremlin is left without missiles and without hope. All of this and more in our episode of Hotspot. Shock! Russia is stirring up the Baltic. The ships have already set out. The Kremlin's July storm. Exercises or a new war? Putin has no intention of stopping. Is Russia getting a second wind? Pokrovsk is on fire. Did they enter or not? What is really happening in the city? Watch right now.
The new Putin elite, that is, the so-called heroes of the so-called special military operation, never cease to amaze. For example, a war participant from the Tayuman region killed his wife on their wedding night.
At some point, Alexei stabbed Marina in the chest. The woman died from blood loss. Marchuk had previously been prosecuted for disorderly conduct, and he had already beaten Marina before ultimately stabbing her to death. The court sentenced the hero to 12.5 years.
Only after the court's verdict did he announce that he wanted to return to the front. And in Novosibirsk, a participant of the special military operation spent 3 months in a row robbing stores and frightening the shop assistants. He would simply walk into a store with a huge knife and take whatever he wanted. But it's not just at home or on the front lines that Putin's soldiers continue to prove their inhumanity. In the Donetsk region, Russian occupiers deliberately shot a local resident who was riding a bicycle, finishing him off with additional shots. Sometime later, Ukrainian soldiers found these occupiers and eliminated them. The armed forces of Ukraine also continue to hold back the enemy on various sections of the front. The situation remains difficult in the Pokrovsk direction, where the enemy continues its offensive. You remember that enemy sabotage groups broke into the city? Their elimination is still ongoing.
At the moment, the occupiers are trying to expand their presence along the flanks of the Pokrovsk agglomeration, primarily in the area of Mayorat. Currently, the occupiers are attempting to advance from the area of the settlement of Razino near the mine and to take direct control of the locations of the Ukrainian Defense Forces. This is the only paved road. In addition, the enemy is trying to attack simultaneously with a wide flank, specifically in the area of Novoekonomichne. This is the so-called tactic of small encirclements. In other words, it is the threat of operational encirclement aimed at forcing units of Ukrainian defense forces out of their positions.
Meanwhile, the Kremlin is preparing for a large-scale war and plans to spend about $1 trillion on rearmament by the end of 2036. This is the largest armament program by the aggressor country since the collapse of the Soviet Union. As part of the military reform, Russia has already created 2 new military districts, the Moscow and Leningrad districts. The formation of new divisions, units and military formations is also planned.
Russian budget spending specifically on the defense sector in 2025 will amount to $149 billion. For comparison, this figure has increased by 38% compared to the previous year, which indicates further militarization of both the Russian economy and, accordingly, the total mobilization of the political and informational components of the Russian Federation.
These actions are yet another confirmation that the Kremlin is preparing for a large-scale war with NATO, states a new analytical report from the Institute for the Study of War.
The Russian Federation is considering the possibility of escalating tensions directly on the borders with NATO countries and the possibility of a direct invasion of NATO territory, primarily referring to the Baltic states. In addition, the Russian Federation is already making territorial claims against Sweden regarding the island of Gotland.
While Moscow is making plans, Ukraine may receive even more Patriot systems. The US Department of Defense is negotiating possible bilateral agreements to supply Kyiv with additional American air defense systems.
At the moment, several European countries are considering the possibility of transferring Patriot systems. First and foremost, this concerns Germany, the Netherlands, and accordingly the possibility of transferring air defense systems. It's not just about Patriot systems, but also NASAMS, which is Norway. So we can say that a number of countries have already announced the possibility of expediting the transfer of air and missile defense systems to meet the needs of the armed forces of Ukraine.
And finally, it is likely that Moscow interpreted Trump's 5-day ultimatum as a carte blanche for an offensive in Ukraine. After all, many Russian officials considered the threats from the American president to be softer than expected, writes The Guardian.
This does not correspond to reality. This is the Russian Federation's attempt to put on a brave face in a losing situation. At this point, we are already talking about comprehensive pressure from the United States, primarily targeting the economic sector of the Russian Federation. This is not only a collective decision by defense industry countries to increase oil production, which accordingly automatically leads to a decrease in oil prices, but also correspondingly the 18th package of sanctions from EU countries.
So far, despite the sanctions and the critical situation in the Russian economy, Putin continues the war. After all, he simply cannot show weakness or admit failures on the front.
A nuclear sensation. The US has returned super powerful weapons to Europe. A new generation nuclear bomb is already in Britain. NATO is strengthening. Russia is preparing for the worst. A crucial decision has already been made. Washington is betting on nuclear escalation. Everything is heading in that direction.
For the first time in 17 years, Washington has brought weapons of mass destruction to Britain. The US has delivered the most advanced version of bombs, which are the main nuclear weapons of America's strategic forces, to its largest European airbase. However, neither the American nor the British authorities have commented in any way on the alleged deployment of these weapons.
The first information about the possible return of nuclear weapons to the territory of the United Kingdom dates back to 2022. At that time, Western media reported that the United States was reconstructing this facility, which had been effectively mothballed in 2008. And accordingly, the actions of the United States should be seen as a gradual return to the tactics of nuclear deterrence, which was one of the defining features of the NATO bloc. This also applies to the foreign policy course of the United Kingdom.
As reported by British publications, last week B-61-12 thermonuclear bombs were delivered to a newly built secure storage facility at the Lakenheath Air Base in eastern England. Thus, the United Kingdom became the sixth country in Europe to host US nuclear weapons.
In March, Polish President Andrzej Duda called on the United States to deploy nuclear capabilities on his country's territory as a possible preventive measure to deter a military invasion by the Russian Federation from the territory of the Republic of Belarus. In addition, on the 5th of March, French President Emmanuel Macron stated that his country is ready to deploy its nuclear capabilities on the territory of a number of European countries.
The B-61-12G gravity bombs have a yield of up to 50 kilotons, which is more than 3 times the power of the atomic weapon dropped on Hiroshima in 1945. Simply put, it's like having 4 bombs in one.
This weapon is considered one of the most versatile in the United States nuclear arsenal. Its development began back in the 1960s, and since then there have been 12 modifications. It should be noted that the B-61-12H has 4 possible yield settings, which is quite remarkable, ranging from 0.3 to 50 kilotons. Accordingly, the development of the latest modification, the B-61-12, began in 2008.
American nuclear weapons had already been stationed at the Lakenheath base in the UK during the Cold War, but they were completely removed from there in 2008 as part of arms reductions in Europe. The likely return of nuclear weapons is part of a program to develop and modernize nuclear facilities in response to heightened tensions with the Kremlin following Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Back in March 2025, Trump called on the Russian Federation and China to pursue nuclear disarmament, but he did not receive any corresponding political signal from either the Russian Federation or accordingly China. And against the backdrop of recent statements by the political leadership of the Russian Federation about the possibility of a nuclear strike on the territory of the United Kingdom, the return of the nuclear arsenal to this country serves as a warning to the Russian Federation and makes it clear that the United States is prepared to respond appropriately to nuclear threats from the Russian Federation.
Earlier, Russia had already stated that the deployment of American weapons in the United Kingdom would be regarded by Moscow as an escalation and would be met with compensatory countermeasures.
Currently, 5 nuclear facilities are being modernized on the territory of the Russian Federation itself. And this indicates that the Russian Federation is sending a political signal to the United States that it has in fact effectively denounced the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. There are 11 nuclear facilities located on the territory of the Russian Federation, but problems with the Russian budget, namely the lack of funds, currently allow for the reconstruction of only 5 facilities. And according to the Russian side's own assessment, this will once again turn into a long-term construction project and yet another set of corruption monuments to the Russian Ministry of Defense.
On the 24th of June, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom announced plans to purchase F-35A fighter jets from the United States, which are capable of carrying B-61-12 nuclear bombs. This purchase represents the largest strengthening of the United Kingdom's nuclear capability in a generation.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Just now, Azerbaijan has challenged Russia. A general shot down a plane and became a Kremlin favorite. Baku threatens retaliation for the downed aircraft over Aktau. Moscow, get ready. North Ossetia is in fear. Putin is afraid of the SBU. Istanbul is boiling. The geopolitical moves of Ukraine and the Russian Federation have been made. What is being decided behind the scenes?
In Russia, General Alexander Tolopov, who was involved in the downing of the Azerbaijani plane over Grozny, has been promoted. The Russian authorities continue to blatantly spit in the face of some of their main partners from the past, who are now their current enemies.
It's all abundantly clear to us. We definitively know what precisely happened, and we can absolutely prove it. And we also know that the Russian authorities are fully aware of what truly happened. And the pressing question is, why don't they simply do what any reasonable neighbor would naturally do? Our requests or demands are absolutely natural. To admit guilt in this incident, to punish those who fired on our plane, and to pay compensation to the families of the victims, to those who were injured, and to the company Azal to cover their losses.
2 Wagner mercenaries have been arrested in Azerbaijan. They will be tried under the article for mercenarism. The relationship between the formerly friendly countries is literally falling apart before our eyes.
For Russia, there is a major problem overall. Its influence in the Caucasus has now weakened quite noticeably after the Azerbaijani-Armenian conflict, and Armenia has changed the direction of its development and is now increasingly looking toward France. Azerbaijan, for its part, is in even closer allied relations with Ankara. It is obvious that Russia will continue to try by all possible means, political sabotage and hybrid methods to put Azerbaijan in its place.
Meanwhile, a new round of negotiations is beginning in Istanbul. Putin has promoted the head of the negotiating delegation, Medinsky, to the position of chief Kremlin ideologue.
Medinsky can be given any powers, just as they could give them to, say, Ushakov, Patrushev, or anyone else from Putin's inner circle. But the fact remains that apart from Putin, no one makes decisions in Russia. And this status of Medinsky as a dictaphone person is quite logical, and it directly stems from the role that Medinsky performs. He takes messages from Putin, brings them to the negotiations in Turkey, and simply records everything he hears from Ukraine. He is not authorized to make any decisions because everything depends on Putin's vision.
Medinsky is known for his absurd statements, for example, claiming that Russians have an extra chromosome, which in official science is a sign of Down syndrome. In addition, the Kremlin ideologue constantly distorts historical facts.
Entry under the protectorate into the Moscow Tsardom. What kind of reunification? There was no Ukraine. There was no statehood. What is there to talk about? That's why we are assigning all the correct historical assessments here in this case, getting rid of the forced ideologization that gave children false ideas about what really happened.
But those who voice real historical facts in Russia are the real criminals. A court in Moscow has sentenced blogger Dud to 2 months of arrest in absentia for violating the law on foreign agents. The only strange thing is that despite all his statements, he still hasn't been given a real prison term, unlike many others.
It was supposedly a referendum after which Russia announced that the Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhia regions are now part of the Russian Federation. What is this if not conquest? In 2014, Russia annexed Crimea, and after that, it started the war in Donbass. Is it normal to bomb infrastructure, leaving ordinary Ukrainians without heat just before winter? Or is the Russian army to blame for invading foreign territory, getting bogged down there, and now not knowing what to do? Maybe it's not Zelensky who's to blame, but the one who dragged the army there?
One of Putin's main allies, Xi Jinping, is already expecting US President Trump to visit this fall. They haven't yet announced what they'll be negotiating or dividing.
Chairman Xi Jinping extended an invitation for me to visit China, and we will most probably undertake this visit in the not-so-distant future. I've been invited by many people, but we'll make this decision fairly soon.
It's obvious that Trump's attempts to build relations with China from a position of strength haven't had any particular success. And it's quite clear that Washington has made more than just one attempt to hold constructive meetings with China. But so far, during Trump's second term, no real progress has been genuinely achieved.
The eccentric decisions of the American president continue. Trump has decided to withdraw the US from UNESCO. Let us recall that the US already left the organization during his previous term.
Further participation in UNESCO does not serve the national interest of the United States. UNESCO actively works on addressing various social and cultural issues that frequently cause significant disagreements. UNESCO's controversial decision to admit the State of Palestine as a full member is extremely problematic, directly contradicts established US policy, and has substantially contributed to the widespread dissemination of anti-Israeli rhetoric within the organization.
The level of threats that exist in the world is incomparable to the fact that the US is leaving an international organization that deals with the protection of historical heritage. In general, his criticism toward NATO, toward other organizations and alliances specifically, European allies looks far more threatening than the US withdrawal from UNESCO.
The world is changing ever more rapidly, and it seems that in this very new reality, more and more countries are focused solely on their own interests, even at the expense of the well-being of the surrounding world.
Aliyev went against Putin. Propaganda is in a frenzy. Skabeva is furious. Aliyev put Russia in its place. Popov wiped away his tears. Azerbaijan is no longer a friend. Explosive details watch right now.
The full-scale war, which has now been going on for almost 4 years, is revealing unexpected truths and paradoxes, from the luck of a generation and a liberation that no one asked for, to propaganda stories and endless strikes on infrastructure. But still, why does the Russian person fight? Not because he has to, not because he's defending anything, but because he simply can't not fight. And of course, out of boredom. Life hasn't worked out, the daily routine is dull, so you need a purpose. And as everyone knows, it's easiest to look for meaning in an armored personnel carrier.
So why does a Russian person go to war?
Just out of boredom. You sit there, life goes on, and it just gets tiresome. You sit there with all this, a potato patch, some kind of weeds, and you think, why not go fight? Why don't I go on a campaign with Igor out there to the Polovtsian lands? It would be interesting to see the Polovtsians, to risk my life. Let me go fight. The sun has darkened. Oh, I don't believe it. The sun, I'll go fight. He went and fought. And then there was the Battle of Kulikovo. It's pure pleasure, just to go and fight. Perezvet, after all, was sitting on the stove out of sheer boredom. So they sent him there to fight.
Meanwhile, the Russian Orthodox Church continues to look for someone to blame. They finally diagnosed the cause of family troubles. Women are to blame because they filed for divorce. It all makes sense. If you filed for divorce, then you destroy the family, regardless of the reasons.
Love comes later, or it doesn't come at all. Unfortunately, in most cases here, it doesn't come. Already 70% of marriages end in divorce. It's a catastrophe. Moreover, in 80% of cases, women are to blame. To blame for what? They're the ones filing for divorce. not men, but women. And why is that? Because women are sensitive souls. Women need chemistry.
Kharkiv region. The Russian army arrives with so-called liberation, but for some reason the local residents give away their positions. They say the equipment is hidden, they tell where it's stashed in the forest, they point out where shots are fired from the village, they pass on coordinates, as if they're not happy, as if they weren't waiting, as if they know themselves who their enemy is and who isn't.
The situation with the civilians there was rather peculiar. So tell me, how exactly did they give you away?
Well, how did they give us away? I saw a woman, a girl with a child, together with a young man, probably her husband, pointing with a finger, showing where the guys were hiding, you know, the Russians.
Why?
That's just what they wanted to do.
Nikita Sergeyevich Mikhalkov, a people's philosopher and, as it turns out, a potential methodologist on patriotism, expressed mild bewilderment. Why, he wondered, aren't his programs used in school lessons called conversations about important things?
Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin knows about Besogun and told me that it's a very powerful weapon. What happened? Two scenarios emerged. One scenario is without Besogun, and the other scenario is at the discretion of the teachers. If they want to show it, they do. If they don't, they don't. I have no ambitions in this regard. But as it turns out, you can be heard by the president.
In the fourth year of the war, something unexpected became clear. A gold Aeroflot card doesn't guarantee a flight to Venice if it's morning at Domodedovo, there's a siren, and drone debris on the runway. How many years can you live next to a war but not in it? And suddenly it turned out there is normal distance. Everything is much closer now, not just on the screen, but outside the window, not somewhere out there, but right here.
My tickets from Istanbul to Venice disappear. 3 tickets. Now, for each ticket, they're asking for an extra $980. It's the same thing, yes. Exactly the same thing. What is going on? There should at least be some information.
Well, now everything is clear. Russia wants Ukraine to cease to exist as a state. There was no denazification, no demilitarization, no desire to save Ukrainians dreaming of becoming part of a greater Russia.
What exactly do we want? We want Ukraine as a sovereign state to cease to exist, for its entire military potential to be completely destroyed, and for the political class that has always turned any Ukrainian state into an anti-Russia entity to disappear as well. For these people to leave, I don't know, let me put it gently, to emigrate somewhere or just go far away.
There was only one motive: to destroy, to subjugate, to erase from the map.
So that from Ukraine for decades and centuries to come, it would never again be possible to create another anti-Russia. That is our goal, and if there is an opportunity to strike, we strike. If there is an opportunity to destroy military potential, we destroy it. Let them be a little afraid of us. They've gotten too relaxed over there.
Director Konstantin Bogomolov, known for his postmodern productions and marriage to Ksenia Sobchak, has once again shaken up the media space. Though this time it was in a metaphysical sense. In an interview, Bogomolov stated,
I think that what happened 3 years ago has so radically changed the environment we live in, that in a certain sense, well, it's the fortune of our generation that we find ourselves in this historical period, which forces us to talk about the essential things.
Well, indeed, for some it's war, and for others it's a reason for deep reflection in mention on Rublievka.
Shock. Russia is being torn apart. Life is worse than it was in the 90s. People are starving while Putin keeps waging war. A revolt is brewing. The Russian people are on the edge. And the whole truth about the Russian Federation is being hidden. Pensions down, missiles up, life all over again. The people are furious. The Kremlin is taking everything for the sake of bloody terror. Social benefits, medicine, and even potato salt thrown into the furnace of war.
13.5 trillion rubles just this year, or $144 billion. That's how much waging war against Ukraine is costing Russians. These are official figures, and Putin himself confirms them. At the same time, earlier, the head of Ukraine's GUR, Budanov, stated that every day the aggressor country's treasury loses nearly $1 billion. These amounts keep increasing, but incomes remain the same, if not less.
So what do we have in Russia's budget for the current year? With expected inflation, they say 9.5%, but real inflation will definitely be over 10%. There was an increase in defense spending by 2.3 trillion rubles. And how did they manage to increase it? By cutting other budget items. So what did they cut? They cut social spending. Even if it's by 700 billion, it's still significant. And even if they had kept social spending at the 2024 level, inflation roughly 10% would have eaten up that amount anyway. So even though inflation will eat up 10%, they still went ahead and cut social spending further.
As a result, in order to keep waging war, the Kremlin is sacrificing its own people. At the beginning of the year, it's not so noticeable, but by mid-year, the money runs out and they start tightening the belt. There are already known cases where, due to a lack of funds, a 23-year-old woman died, simply because the Ministry of Health didn't have the money to buy the necessary medication. We're talking about Tatiana Drozdova. She had suffered from severe combined immunodeficiency since childhood and was the first person in Russia with this diagnosis to reach adulthood. She could have lived longer, but the Kremlin's priority is the war. In 2023, doctors prescribed her an expensive medication. A one-month course cost over 50 million rubles. The regional Ministry of Health refused to purchase it. The young woman took the state to court and won, but time was lost. Moreover, the Ministry of Health filed an appeal. Tatiana died in June, never receiving the help she needed.
In May of this year, Tatiana's condition suddenly worsened. She suffered from severe pneumonia twice, complained about her breathing, but did not receive the necessary treatment. She was sent for a chest X-ray, but the results indicating another case of pneumonia were not communicated to her. The young woman endured pain for several days and was eventually hospitalized. In the hospital, Tanya was given the same antibiotic we take, only not in tablets but intravenously. These medications did not help her recover from pneumonia. The doctors were aware of this. The daughter complained to her attending physician about severe headaches and partial loss of vision, but the treatment was not changed.
And there will only be more such tragedies soon. After all, as former Russian President Medvedev once said, there is no money, but you hang in there.
I think this problem will make itself strongly felt in the fourth quarter of this year, when it becomes clear that all the funds allocated to the social sector will have been spent, and accordingly, there will be no opportunity to buy the same medications or provide people with the same insurance.
There's no point even talking about any repairs or renovations. Just think about it. As of 2024, nearly 4,000 schools were not connected to sewage systems, more than 3,400 had no running water, and 3,500 lacked central heating. In the Republic of Tuva, ordinary toilets are considered a luxury. Across the country, 27% of educational institutions are in need of major repairs. The situation is probably even worse now.
In Russia, there are simply no resources for any kind of repairs or anything related to the social sphere. There's just no money allocated for this in the budget. Moreover, it has been repeatedly stated that more and more regions of Russia are finding themselves in a situation where if a window in an administrative building is broken, there simply won't be any way to fix it, because that would require resources and there will be nowhere to get them from.
On top of everything else, Russians are now at risk of having the money they've earned through their own hard work taken away from them. The State Duma is already discussing in its second reading a law that would prohibit dacha owners from earning money on their plots. In other words, growing potatoes, which has helped many Russians survive, could already be considered a violation as early as the fall of 2025. The authorities are calling this a fight against illegal business. In reality, the Kremlin simply wants to refill the treasury at the expense of Russians and then, of course, spend that money on the war.
The shame of a great power. The Russian army is in crisis. There are no missile reserves. The bunker dweller is in shock. Putin's missile program is falling apart before our eyes. Zero technology. Even the hazel tree has withered. Their only hope is for handouts from North Korea. But the price will be steep.
Ukraine has calculated how many missiles Russia is producing and how many it managed to stockpile by the beginning of this month. The main intelligence directorate has published its data. So, according to Ukraine's GUR, by midsummer Russia will have accumulated about 300 ballistic missiles. Of these, 50 were supplied by North Korea. KN-23 As for Russian-made missiles, assembled however with foreign components, there are another 250 Iskanders. Even though Russia is making a concerted effort to ramp up production and reach pre-war levels, just under 800 units, they are nowhere near achieving that. Partly this is due to the constant launches against Ukrainian rear areas.
The Russian economy has long been operating on a war footing, which is why we are witnessing an intensified series of attacks occurring daily in Ukraine. And we can see that the number of all these aerial vehicles, missiles and so on is increasing significantly. In other words, production has already been streamlined and is definitely not an indicator that the Russian Federation is ready to end its aggression.
According to the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine, as of mid-May, the occupiers had a stockpile of approximately 580 ballistic missiles intended for mobile launch systems. At the same time, their production rate increased in 2025. If last year Russia was producing about 40 missiles per month, now it is up to 60 units. According to reports from the Ukrainian Air Force, during May and June, the occupiers used at least 88 Iskander-M or KN-23 missiles against Ukrainian cities. Air defense units managed to shoot down 23 of them. The Russians have not made much progress in the area of strategic weaponry either, having only once carried out a relatively successful launch of the Oreshnik among modern systems. Russia has failed to demonstrate anything new.
Their so-called terrifying missiles with Armat, Satan, these are things that were once produced in the Soviet Union, or more precisely at the Yuzhmash plant in Dnipropetrovsk. In other words, these missiles are equipped with Ukrainian engines. The new developments, our engineers are the ones creating them. That's why the Russians have no technological prospects. All they can do is increase the quantity of not very high quality weapons and what they produce, and try, to achieve some kind of balance, not through the quality of their weapons, but simply by having a greater quantity.
Our intelligence also reports on the missile launchers for Russian ballistic missiles that they have brought up to our borders. We're talking about 60 operational tactical missile systems deployed along the line separating Russian and Ukrainian forces. They are primarily intended for those very Iskanders, with a range of up to 500 kilometers, which allows them to strike almost the entire eastern and central parts of Ukraine. Accordingly, they are currently the main targets for Ukraine's defense forces.
It's very difficult to shoot down these missiles. So what needs to be done? We need to destroy the production of these missiles, the launchers, and eliminate the very possibility of launching them. You can see that oil refineries, gas and oil infrastructure are currently not a priority target for our armed forces and special services. The main targets are military industrial production, the manufacturing of shaheds, electronics and various components.
I would like to know that only in June, Ukrainian defense forces eliminated 3 launchers in Russia's Bryansk region, from which the enemy had been launching missile attacks on Ukraine.
That's all for now, and for more fiery news from the front, tune in to the next episode.